My name is Joe Slattery. I'm on the staff in the Genealogy department here at Broadmoor Branch, Shreve Memorial Library. And today I'm going to tell you about the history of Centenary College football. And it goes back to the 1890s. Mostly going to talk about the history here, their football program in Shreveport. And we'll start off with some statistics and numbers. You can see, as I mentioned, they started playing a little bit in the 1890s, but at that time, Centenary College was located in Jackson, Louisiana, East Feliciana Parish. They moved up here to Shreveport in 1908, and it's been the last time they played a game, Centenary played a game here was in 1947, so that's been 76 years ago. So they had 3 seasons in Jackson, Louisiana. Then they played 32 seasons here in Shreveport. For 18 years, they didn't field a team. That's mainly those years. There were 12 years down in Jackson when they called a halt to the football program. So it was eliminated after the 1896 season. But once it got up here, it started again. And they played altogether 281 games. Centenary won 160 of them and lost 100. And so their winning percentage is 62%. They also didn't have football in the years 1915, 16, 1918. Of course, one of those, 1918, was a war year. Then 1942 to 1946, also they didn't field any football teams. Again, those were some of the World War II years. So there were some years up here when they didn't have a football team. Sometimes it was because they couldn't get together enough opponents. And then sometimes it was financial problems. They didn't have the money to have a football team. Okay, here's some more facts about the Centenary football program. They had 3 undefeated seasons, and I'll get into those 3 undefeated seasons in a little while. They won the conference they were in 2 years, and they were in 1 bowl game. And I'll talk about that one too. And during one stretch in the 1930s, they won 24 consecutive games. They played 24 consecutive games without a loss. There were some ties in there. 2 of the Centenary coaches are in the College Hall of Fame. 1 Centenary player is the College Football Hall of Fame, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame. And I'll talk about him also and all these other ones that I'm mentioning. 1 Centenary player, he played in pros, and then he coached pro football, and his team that he was coaching won 2 NFL championships. Then there were 2 of the Centenary players who were college All-Americans, and 12 Centenary players went on to play pro football. Centenary began their football in 1908 when they first got here to Shreveport. You see that they weren't playing many games at first. The first years they had usually 4 to 7 games. You see their first season they played 4, they won 3 and lost 1, and the 1 game they lost was to Haynesville High School. They were playing, since it was hard for them to find some opponents, sometimes they played high schools. They played not just Haynesville High School, they played sometimes Shreveport High School, they played Minden High School, sometimes even over in Marshall, over in Texas, Marshall High School. So they were looking for anybody around here who had a football team so they could have a game. And Louisiana College is they ended up playing them a number of times. That's a college that is in Pineville, Louisiana. Here's the first photo I can find of one of the football teams in 1912. And that year, Centenary won 2 games. They lost 1 and tied 1, so they played 4 games. And a couple of games that they won, they beat the Shreveport Athletic Club, which those were people who were older than college students, but they knew football and they wanted to, were interested in playing Centenary. And so there were several games that Centenary played with the Shreveport Athletic Club. And then on the Marshall, Texas, sometimes they played Marshall High School, and other times it was the Marshall College over there. And I'll just be going through some of the more important years that the Centenary football team had. So, like I say, there were a lot of years between 1912 and 1920 where they didn't field a team. But now in 1923, they played 11 games, and they won 10 of them. They only lost 1. They had 1 loss to Boston College. They ended up playing Boston College two times. So they lost 14. Hard to see the scores on there, but they won most of their games by a large margin, but they lost to Boston College 14-0. So 23 was one of their winning seasons, where I think one time they did travel to Boston College and up to Boston to play them, and then the other game I think might have been down here in Shreveport. Next, this is one of the Centenary's best teams that they fielded. In 1927, they were undefeated. Their coach was Homer Norton, and I'll talk more about him later. The quarterback in 1927, or at least one of the quarterbacks, was named Jake Hanna. And he's another one who, some of their star players I'll have more about, and also the coaches. So in 1927, they won 10 games, and most of them were by a pretty good margin, except for Baylor. They just beat 9-6, and TCU they beat 7-3. So there's a variety. Some of them are small colleges that they played: Millsaps in Jackson, Mississippi, Florida Southern. But they did play some larger universities like Rice, TCU, Baylor, SMU. And Louisiana Tech, it ends up that Louisiana Tech, they played them a pretty good number of times. I'll have a list of some of their opponents and who they played the most. But Louisiana Tech was on their schedule quite a bit. Next, going to the Centenary team of 1932. This was also an undefeated team. They did have 1 tie. And this is the team that beat LSU. They beat them here in Shreveport at Centenary's field. Beat them 6-0. They had the 1 tie was against Arkansas, and their coach was still Homer Norton this time. Here's a photo I found from the newspaper. It was when Centenary played LSU here in Shreveport in 1932. It's not very clear, but this was looks like it was a pretty good sellout, and so this is the game where Centenary won 6-0. Also, I've noticed when I was researching, quite quite a number of these games were low-scoring games, and a lot of ties also, and a lot of games. Sometimes both teams didn't even get to 10 points. The next year, in 1933, they also were undefeated. They did have 4 ties, so they played 12 games. So this was their 3rd season that where they were undefeated, in 1927, 1932, and 1933. It's probably hard to see some of the on their results, but they had close wins. Were with SMU and Ole Miss, and the 4 ties they had were they tied LSU, and that one was in Baton Rouge. That one was a 0-0 tie. They also had Texas, a 0-0 tie. TCU was a 0-0 tie. Now the Arkansas game was 7-7. And that 7-7 tie with Arkansas was actually a bowl game. That's the only bowl game that Centenary was in. It was called the Dixie Classic. So it was held January 1st, 1934 in Dallas. And this is the bowl game that later on became the Cotton Bowl. And they were playing in a venue, at that time the venue, which is now the Cotton Bowl, was called Fair Park. There was an attendance of at least 12,000 people at that bowl game. And so it ended up in a 7-7 tie. The quarterback was, for Centenary during the 33 season, his name was Manning Smith. And then they had the player that you see in the photo there was, he was one of the linemen. They had, his name was Binion, and he was one of their good linemen. There was also a player on the 33 team that was named Paul Geisler. He played end, and he also played on defense. A lot of time during 20s and 30s, players went both ways. They played offense and defense. So Geisler was an end, and he also played on the defense, and he was an All-American player. Was voted nationwide All-American in 1933. And here's a couple of photos. The one on the left shows the stadium, the Centenary Stadium, in 1934. And then of course the one on the right is a modern day aerial photo of what it looks like in that same area. Supposedly where the football field was in 1934 is right around where the baseball, you can see the baseball diamond, and it was more not, but the field that they're supposedly going to be using next year when they start play is going to be there on the right hand side of that modern day photo where it looks like it's also being used as a soccer field. So it's a little also on both photos. They're not exactly showing in the same direction, but toward the top on both of them is going toward the campus. Now I'm going to go to 1939. You can see their record was a losing record. They won 2, lost 9, and tied 1. Their coach, they had a different coach at this time. His name was Curtis Parker. And this was actually the first losing season for Centenary since 1920. They had I think they had one season where they were like 5-5, but that's not a losing season. but the rest of their years since 1920 were winning, or that tied season. And 1939 is also famous for a game that was on November 11th, 1939. I'd say it was famous or infamous. This game with Texas Tech was played here on November 11th, 1939. It was played in a heavy thunderstorm. The field became a muddy swamp. I think 2 1/4 inches fell that day. See, they had bunches of fumbles, over 14. The official could not put the ball down on the ground, or else the water would carry it off. So he had to hold it until they were ready to snap the ball. And like I mentioned here, I've seen several articles about this game. Some I've seen sports writers said it was the worst college game ever played. It ended up being a 0-0 tie. So others say it was just the craziest game ever played. But there were 13 records for this college game, the most ever in a college game. These 13. Some of the records that were set in this game was the most punts, 77 punts in this game. The fewest number of plays, 33 by both teams. You had 12 plays by Texas Tech, 21 plays by Centenary. Only 30 yards were gained the whole game. That was for both teams. So there wasn't much happening except a lot of fumbles. They were punting a lot. Anyway, that was the tie. That year, Centenary had 1 tie, and this was it. The next 2 seasons, in 1940 and 1942, were also losing seasons. After not having a losing season since 1920, they had 3 in a row. 1940, they were 3-7, and you can see the 3 wins were against St. Louis University and Washington University in St. Louis and Southwest Presbyterian. And then they didn't win any games in 1941. And they had 2 ties. So it looked like for a while, and then World War II started, of course, at the end of 1941. And so they decided not to field a football team during the war years. And first it looked like that might be the last season altogether. But they did play another one they had another season in 1947. And that one in 1947 was also a losing season. And that was the last season for the Centenary football. Okay, so I looked at all the opponents that Centenary played. They played 75 different colleges. Or I did put in there a few of those high schools that they played early on. So this is showing how many times they played each of these opponents. Northwestern used to be called Normal. And they played them the most, 20 games. Louisiana Tech used to be called Louisiana Industrial Institute. And they played them. And also these Northwestern and Louisiana Tech, those 2 at the top, were in the conference. There was a small college conference that Centenary was in. And both Northwestern and Louisiana Tech were part of that. But then the other games, the other teams, TCU and Baylor, were not in that conference. Louisiana College in Pineville was in their conference. So they played a lot of teams that were outside their conference. You see, they played, you can see some of the teams in this area, in the Arklatex area, Baylor and TCU, Ole Miss, University of Texas. And also they played this Henderson State, which is in Arkadelphia, seven games. And I read somewhere somebody said that they may have played Notre Dame. I didn't find any evidence of that. I don't know if they did. I didn't see it in any of their results of their seasons that they played Notre Dame. Okay, here's how they did against some of these opponents. You can see they had a pretty easy time with Louisiana College. They beat them 10 out of 10 times. And you see they did pretty well against Texas A&M. They beat them 6 and just lost to A&M 3 times. On the other hand, on the worst records, you can see they had a tough time with Texas Tech and TCU and Tulane too. They were 0-3 against Tulane. And the LSU, some people like to say that LSU never beat Centenary. Well, if you take away the 3 times when they were down in Jackson, Louisiana, and they played LSU, LSU beat Centenary pretty good at least 2 of those 3 times when they were in Jackson. But now if you're just looking at after they came up here to Shreveport, there were Centenary beat them once and they tied. So talk about in the Shreveport era, LSU hasn't been. And then they haven't done too well against Arkansas either. Now I'm going to mention some of the coaches and the players, some of the major ones there at Centenary. This first one they called Bo McMillan, and he was coached from 1922 to 1924. You see, he had he had 26 wins and only 3 losses during that time period when he was coach. He was born over in Texas. There's quite a number of the players here that went to Centenary that were born in Texas. Of course, and there were some in, of course, Arkansas, Louisiana, but a fair amount that were born in Texas. And Bo was born in Prairie Hill, Texas. He played at a college, Center, Texas, in Danville, Kentucky, which was, that college was in the time period when Bo was a student there. He was a player there at Center, a quarterback. He was All-American 3 years in a row. And during that time period, Center College had one of the best football programs in the country. They were a small college there in Danville, but in 1920, they only lost 1 game, and that game was to Harvard, which Harvard had at that time, Harvard had the best football team in the country. So then in 1921, they got to play Harvard again, and this time Center College beat them. So after he finished there at Center College, he wanted to get into coaching, and he decided to come here to Centenary. He wanted to go to a smaller, coach at a smaller school. And he was, so he coached here till 24. Then he left, and he went to Geneva College in Pennsylvania. The only thing is, he took some of his players with him. Some of the better players went with him when he left to go to. They still had some years left of college, and they went with him to Geneva College. So he was there at Geneva, and he was. Then he also coached at Kansas State, and he coached at Indiana for 14 years. He did pretty well at, especially there at Indiana. So some of the pro teams decided to hire him as a coach. And Detroit Lions, he coached there at the Lions for about 3 years. And then he went to coach also for the Philadelphia Eagles. So he left the Lions in 1950. And it's interesting because as he was leaving being the head coach of the Lions, in 1951, there was another Centenary football person who ended up taking over as the head coach at Detroit Lions. So went from one Centenary personality to another one. His name was Buddy Parker. I'm going to talk more about Buddy Parker in a minute. So Bo McMillan, he had some good record in coaching college, but his NFL record wasn't quite as good. He won 14 and he lost 24. The next one is probably better known than Bo McMillan, and he was a successful coach at Centenary and elsewhere. Homer Norton was actually the head coach before Bo. He coached a couple of years, 1920, 1921. Then Homer decided to concentrate on basketball. He was the head basketball coach at Centenary. So during that time period, Bo McMillan came in to be the head football coach. Homer Norton did basketball, and he also was the assistant coach in football. So while Bo McMillan was there, Homer Norton was still around. He was also coaching baseball too. And then in 1926, Homer became the head football coach again. And there was 1 year in there, 1926, where he was the head coach of football, basketball, and baseball, all in the same year. So Homer Norton's record at Centenary was 60 wins, 19 losses, and 9 ties. He was born in Carrollton, Alabama, and he went to college at Birmingham Southern, played 4 different sports there, so that's why he was able to be a successful coach in 3 sports there at Centenary. So he left Centenary in 1934, and he was hired by Texas A&M. He coached at Texas A&M from 1934 to 1947. You can see his record at A&M was a good one, 82 wins, 53 losses, 9 ties. And Texas A&M only has 1 national championship, and that was 1939, and the coach was Homer Norton. And Homer he died in 1965. He's one of the ones that I mentioned from that's in the College Football Hall of Fame. Bo McMillan is also in the College Football Hall of Fame. There's two of them, those two coaches, and then there's also some couple of players too that are in the College Football Hall of Fame. The third coach I'm going to mention came a little later, right after in 1934. So it was after Homer Norton had left, and Curtis Parker had been he'd been the varsity basketball coach here at Centenary from 27 until, and he even kept coaching basketball while he was the head football coach too, until 1939. But Curtis Parker went to University of Arkansas, played football and basketball there from 23 to 26. And also while he was here at Centenary, he was the athletic director for 6 years. So about after he got out of coaching, 1939, he started getting interested in the oil business, and by 1955 he'd started his own company, which was called the Curtis Parker Oil Company. He retired in 1975. There were 12 Centenary players who ended up playing pro football, and those are the 12 there. I just have them in alphabetical order. The ones that have little asterisks by them are ones that I'm going to talk a little more about. See, some of them, it goes all the way from Conrad Baker, who played 10 years with the Cardinals. At that time, they were the Chicago Cardinals. You also have, playing 9 years was Cal Hubbard, I'll be talking more about. And then Buddy Parker also played 9 years. Some of those teams might look strange. The Brooklyn Tigers, they were called the Brooklyn Tigers only 1 year. Before that, they were called the Brooklyn Yankees. And then Minnesota, that wasn't the Minnesota Vikings. They were called the Minnesota Red. I can't think. It was like Red Hawks or something like that. And then even for Lou Jennings, he played pros at Providence and Portsmouth. So he had some teams that don't have franchises now. And then they had a team in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. So on Conway Baker, when he was here at Centenary in 1935, he was a tackle and a guard, and he was born in Texas, Marvin, Texas, but his family came here, and he went to Beaird. And after playing for Centenary, he played in the pros for the Chicago Cardinals. And then in 1944, during World War II, I guess because of the shortage of available men to be on the football teams, they had a combined Cardinal and Pittsburgh team. But then after the war was over, the next year in 45, they had a separate Chicago Cardinal team. So after he had his pro career, he stayed here in Shreveport, and he officiated and umpired for Shreveport Parks and Recreation, and then he also worked for the Shreveport's Traffic Engineering Department. And so, some of these photos come from the Centenary Yearbook. Also also there's some photos that come from the Centenary archives, and Chris Brown sent me some good links for some of the information. Paul Geisler, he was an end for a few years here at Centenary. He had the nickname Hoss. And he was born 1909 in Berwick, Louisiana. Went to high school down there in Morgan City. LSU played, of course, Centenary a couple of times during that period, and I don't know what LSU coach it was, but said Paul was fast as a streak. And he was he's one of the football players at Centenary who were All-American. And I'll mention the other one in just a minute. So he was All-American in 1933. He didn't finish up at Centenary. He transferred to get his degree down at Louisiana College. And then he ended up being in the Air Force during World War II, and he stayed in the Air Force after the war and got up to the rank of major. And then he went over into Northeast Louisiana and was a high school coach over there in Lake Providence and Tallulah. And then he became principal and then later superintendent of schools in Lake Providence. Okay, Jake Hanna, or his full name Joseph Lucius Hanna Jr., played quarterback, halfback. I mentioned him. He was on the undefeated 1920-17 team. And then he became coach of at Centenary in 1940 and 1941. He was born in Camden, Mississippi, but his family came over to this area. He also went to Beaird. A lot of these players had played at Beaird and then before going on to Centenary. So he's quarterback, halfback, and receiver in 1927, and then after he got out of Centenary, he coached at 4 high schools in Louisiana and Texas. He coached in Louisiana, he coached high schools in Franklin and in Leesville, and then over in Texas he coached in Corsicana and Gladewater. That was during the 30s. But in 1940, he came back here to Shreveport and was the football coach and athletic director for a couple of years. And during World War II, he was in the Navy. After that, he joined his brother, William T. Hanna, in the Hanna car dealership here in Shreveport. And he died in 1988. Those two photos, the one on the left, that was a photo from the yearbook when he was still at Centenary. The one on the right is from 1940 when he was the head football coach. Merle Hogue was a guard and tackle in 24. He was born in Texarkana, and so he played here Centenary and then went on to play pro football. Played 1 year with the New York Yankees and then 1 year with the Chicago Cardinals. His third year was the Minneapolis Red Jackets. Then after he finished those 3 years, he ended up settling over in Commerce, Texas, and was there just about the rest of his life. He worked for the railroad, first working as a brakeman and then conductor, and he was very involved in the St. Louis Southwestern Railway. And this is probably one of the most well-known of the Centenary football players. Robert Calvin Hubbard, called Cal. He played for Centenary from 22 to 24 as an end and a tackle. He was born in 1900 in Missouri. He wanted to attend West Point, but he was denied because he had flat feet. While he was here at Centenary, he was All-American in 1923, so he and Geisler were the two All-Americans from Centenary. He ended up, after playing several years here at Centenary, when Coach Bo McMillan left to go to Geneva College in Pennsylvania, Cal went with him. And then after he finished college, he played pro tackle for the New York Giants a couple of years, and then Green Bay, and then Pittsburgh. During that time, he was All-Pro 4 times. After he finished his pro football career, he ended up becoming a Major League Baseball umpire. So from 1937 to 1952, he was an umpire. Then he was still an umpire, but he became the supervisor of the American League umpires from 53 to 70. And that's a photo that's from, they use in the College Hall of Fame. Because from this next one, you can see he was elected to the College Football Hall of Fame in 1962, the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1963, Pro Baseball Hall of Fame in 1976. There's a photo of him from the Pro Football Hall of Fame on the left, and then on the right in his baseball umpire's gear. He's the only person to be elected to both the Pro Football and the Pro Baseball Hall of Fames. Now, so he's the only person to be in both. He wasn't a player in baseball. He was just an umpire. But umpires can be elected to the Hall of Fame. And so he was, of course, altogether, he was a baseball umpire for 33 years. And he died in St. Petersburg, Florida. This is another important Centenary player. Played during the 32 to 34. He was a back and a linebacker, running back and a linebacker. Born in Slayton, Texas. So after finishing his playing time at Centenary, he went to the pros and played for Detroit Lions. He was playing fullback for Detroit Lions, but then when he went to the Chicago Cardinals, he became a defensive player, linebacker, and a defensive back. Played for Chicago Cardinals for about 7 years. And he started his pro football coaching in '49 with Chicago Cardinals. But then in '51, he became the head coach with the Detroit Lions. So he's the one who ended up after Bo McMillan had been there with the Detroit Lions. After he left, the next year, Buddy Parker took over. And coached for 5 years with the Detroit Lions, and then he went another 7 years coaching with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And here's some more about Buddy Parker. His pro coaching career was 107 wins, 76 losses, 9 ties. He coached the Detroit Lions to 2 NFL championships, 1952 and 1953. There's a photo of him being carried on the shoulders of his players. I'm not sure if that was in 52 or 53. But they beat Cleveland Browns both those years. And then the next year, 54, they were in the championship game against Cleveland Browns, but they lost. In fact, they got beat pretty bad in that one. Buddy Parker, he's been put on the candidates for election into the Pro Football Hall of Fame for several years. He keeps on narrowly missing being elected. He's come close. They're going to have next year they'll have another vote for election to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and there's a good chance that he might make it next year. And here's the last player I'm going to cover, Dixie Stokes, Jr. He was a center and also a kicker. And he was born in Haslam, Texas, which is, I believe that's right on the border, near Logansport and Joaquin, right in there. He also went to Beaird High School, and he played for Centenary until 36. And he was a good, so he was a center. He also was a good kicker. He made some clutch kicks especially 1933. So in the pros, he played for the Detroit Lions for several years, and then after he got released from the Lions, he stayed in that area up in Detroit, and he worked for a tool company in Memphis, Michigan. But then he ended up getting back into pros in 1943, so he'd been out of the pros for 4 years, but he played for the Chicago Cardinals for 1 year. But he was still had his job in Memphis, Michigan. So during the week he was working with the tool company, and then on the weekends, or at least on Sundays, he was playing in the pros. And he stayed there living in Michigan, but he had family here. I think his mother was still living here in Shreveport. He was on his way in 1967 from Michigan down to Shreveport, and while he's passing through Arkansas, he had a heart attack and died. Okay, here are some of the different names that Centenary has been called over the years, especially the early years. In 1908, when they first started here, the Gladstone Lads. You might not have heard about that one, but it was in the paper several times, the Gladstone Lads. And you might wonder, Gladstone Lads, Centenary is not, Gladstone's not too far away from Centenary, but what they would be called Gladstone Lads? Well, I found probably the reason for that. In 1908, that same time, Gladstone subdivision was started. Gladstone subdivision, if you look, I found the plat of it. It goes right up to the west. It's on the west of Centenary, but it goes up right up to the campus of Centenary. So that's probably why they called them Gladstone Lads. They also, at the same time, for years, they called them the Centenary 11. And of course, that's because you have, 11 men playing on offense and 11 on defense. So So you see that sometimes, Centenary 11. The maroons, I didn't see that too often when I was looking through papers, but they were called the maroons sometime in the early years. Ironsides, I first found the name Ironsides in 1919, and some people say it was Old Ironsides. I never saw old, at least in the paper, they just said Ironsides. So for three years they were called the Ironsides until 1922. When 1922 is when Bo McMillan came to be the head coach. And at that time, of course, Homer Norton was still here. And you had the president, a new president of Centenary too. So they all get together and had a meeting, talk about, what they wanted from the team, and they decided on having a new name for the team. Now, Bo McMillan had been at Center College, and they were known as a prayerful team. While he was there at Center, they started a tradition before a game to do some contemplation and prayer before the game started. And they were called, Center was called the Colonels. But then once they started doing this pregame the pregame prayers, they became known as the Praying Colonels Center. So I think that's why Bo McMillan and Homer Norton and the president, they decided they wanted something that wasn't, Ironsides seemed a little tough sounding. Something, so they came up with Gentlemen. So that they started being called Gentlemen in 1922. It wasn't until a couple of years later, where I see they started to shorten it to the Gents. It was, I think they first started showing them as Centenary Gents during the basketball season. But then before that they were still using Gentlemen. And so on the images there, the image at the top left is the new kind of logo, the new logo for Centenary Football. The one on the right is also, that's the image that is on some of the T-shirts and sportswear for Centenary. And it has, for Centenary Football, and look, that's Skeeter, the mascot. I think 1907 they came up with Skeeter as the mascot, and Skeeter is a Catahoula dog. The one at the bottom is an old logo for when they were when they first started with the Centenary Gentlemen, and it does look a little. I just saw one when the Center College, their Praying Colonels. There's a little bit of similarity between the way this Centenary Gentleman looks and the Center one. So I'm sure that was because of Bo McMillan. But they're got the logo down at the bottom is one that is kind of getting away from. It's not really being used on any of the any type of sportswear or anything. So anyway, that's history of what I found on the Centenary Football program. Are there any questions?
I had a question. I missed the first couple of minutes. So it first started in 1908, was the first official year of football at Centenary?
Well, here in Shreveport, they played. They had some seasons. They had 3 seasons when Centenary was down in Jackson, Louisiana.
So Centenary came to Shreveport in 1908,
Yes.
and with it became a football team.
Yes.
Okay.
So they started right away as soon as they got up here.
Okay.
Also, while I was doing research, I was looking through the paper, and I found in 1922 they Bo McMillan and Homer Norton, before the preseason, they took the squad up to Arkansas to train, and they had 2 teams. They had the McMillanites and the Nortonites. So you had 2 teams play. So some of them were being coached by Homer Norton and some by Bo McMillan. But when I was looking at one of them, I can't remember if it was on the McMillanites or the Nortonites, I saw a name Whitmire. And my grandmother was Whitmire, born in 1907. And she had a brother born in 1905, and I said, I wonder, I knew he graduated from high school in 1921 and played football at Shreveport High School. So I checked a little further. They didn't show the first name, and after checking a little more, I found out that it was my great uncle. I'd never known he played football for Centenary, but he played at least 1 year. He was an end, and he was a kicker too in 1922. His name was Randall Whitmire, who later became an attorney and then a city judge here in Shreveport. So that was something that was a surprise when I found that. Okay. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, it's just a comment. It's just something that happened today. I went to Red River Bank down here to get a check cashed. You know, I haven't lived in Shreveport that long. And the lady's name tag sitting there was Hubbard. Her last name was Hubbard. And I said, are you related to Sam Hubbard, who plays for the Cincinnati Bengals? And she said, not that she knows of, but now there's somebody named Hubbard that played football here, so I have to go find out. Just such a coincidence that I ran across somebody named Hubbard here in Shreveport an hour before I came in. So, anyway.
So anyway, next year, of course, will be the first official season of Centenary Football since 1947, and hope you all go to some of the games. I don't know how many there will be, but I'm sure by that time they'll have. I think they're working on like a athletic facility with dressing rooms and things like that are going to be close to where the field's going to be. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Was
no,
that
no.
okay? First of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your work on this and pulling so much of this history together. I swim around in some of it on a day-to-day basis and help people connect to it, managing the archives at Centenary. And just a few random thoughts that have flashed across my mind during the presentation. Like one, the player Hannah is the uncle of local artist Dorothy Hannah, who is married to retired Professor Bruce Allen. We have Hannah, the football player's scrapbook in the archive. We probably have a dozen of these guys' scrapbooks in the archives of old programs, of tickets, of photographs, of newspaper clippings, of what they ate on the train car when they traveled to places. So there's a ton of this information out there for people interested in it. And recently, me and some student workers compiled a quick kind of overview of Centenary football in a recent exhibit that we have up right now on campus. That's also online, and it goes from the 1890s, where Centenary used to be for 80 years before it went to Shreveport, that team, all the way up through the kind of bizarre 1960s Centenary football team that the SGA funded. It was completely outside of the athletic department. It was like a club sport that played other colleges that usually got beat pretty bad. So yeah, there's a rich history here. And shoot, some of the stuff I'm not aware of. I hadn't heard of a couple of these players before. So thanks again for your work on this. I appreciate it.
But I'm glad I could do this this talk, because I've done one on Shreveport baseball. The pro baseball in Shreveport goes back to the 1890s, and but when I heard that Centenary was going to revive their program, I said, yeah, I want to check into it, because I didn't know that much. And thanks again for sending the all those good links for and that timeline on the football team.
Sure, you're welcome.
As you can see, they were playing some major colleges back then, and especially the 20s through 1940, and doing a good job. So even though there were 12 players who made the pros, I just picked out about half of them to cover. And there's but the newspapers has. In fact, I just found another photo. I wasn't able to get it into this presentation, but a photo from it was 1920s, 21 I think it was, and it was a photo from the paper. It was a good one. That sometimes those photos in the paper are too dark and they're not very good, but this one was a good one of Coach Norton talking to his team before practice, and they were looked like it was.
They said he was inspirational, that he gave good talks. Huh?
Yeah.
He was a spiritual leader for them.
And they said he had a good coaching career. Then when he went to Texas A&M, 1939 is when they won the national championship. Well, thank y'all for coming. If you have any questions, maybe you can send me an email or.
Do you have a card on you by any chance?
No, I don't have do have a brochure or something that shows.
Okay, I'll take that. What is it?
I will get one for you. It's back in the genealogy department. But we have, let's see, the genealogy department usually has at least a couple of programs every month. We'll, next month in October, Reed is going to be doing a program on beginning genealogy. And then I'll be doing one at the end of October on Greenwood Cemetery, which is the city cemetery. It was the second one that was formed here in Shreveport. The first cemetery was, of course, downtown, the Oakland Cemetery. But Greenwood, which is at the corner of Centenary and Stoner. And that one was started in 1990s. But I'll be talking about, I have some slides of some photos that were taken back in the 1970s or 1980s by a well-known genealogist. And so it'd be just kind of like a visual tour of some markers in Greenwood Cemetery. And I think, does somebody else, does Becky have one?
She'll have a computer class. Becky's doing Native American genealogy in November, though. That's her next Becky class.
So, again, thank y'all for coming.